So the whole project Wisdemics took me over about 2 years, and we used to meet every Wednesday for about 4 hours. And we touched upon various topics, and then we decided at one point of time that decided that let's go and integrate it into a single discipline which can be put forward to the public in terms of putting what we call as a teaser to thoughts of various people. All that I will say may not be acceptable to everybody. That's known, because whenever there is a unknown entity coming across you for the first time, there always are doubts and retaliations. But let's keep that, as Raju has already said, aside for some time, and then follow a thread. And then what we will do is, after the first session, that is this one, we will have some time definitely allocated to questions and answers related to this particular session. And when we finish the second session, we will allocate a little more time for questions and answers. Now, keeping that in mind, let's go with the contents. As we have already said that the project Wisdemics was started 2 years back. It has taken us a lot of efforts, and every concept that we will put forward has been thoroughly discussed. We will start with something which we call it as technological bootstrap. And the technological bootstrap, unless it was there, we would not have been here, and I will not have been here to talk and share my views with you. Let's first understand what exactly is meant by the term bootstrap, because unfortunately I have no choice but to use some technical terms. The meaning of bootstrap is that by pulling the lace of your own shoes, okay, you move up. This is physically impossible, but conceptually this is quite true, and technologically also it is quite true. Physically it may not be true that a bootstrap will work, but conceptually it always has been a bootstrap, and technologically also it always has been a bootstrap. What it means is that whatever was developed previously, before time, will be used in a integrative manner to develop new techniques, new theories, and so on, and in turn increasing the power of our knowledge and the power of our technology. This is what we call it as a bootstrap. Physically it is impossible, conceptually and technologically is very much possible, and we have observed that over so many years of our existence on the surface of the earth. So let's have a brief review of this technological bootstrap. Uh, Maybe we started somewhere around 80,000 years back as a Homo sapiens, as a race in the evolution, which ultimately took over as a most successful race on the evolution of life. That was around 80,000 years back, and from 80,000 years back to year 2000, 2020 to be precise, because my references will be at 2020, there have been several phases through which the mankind has passed. The first stage, of course, is what we call it as hunter-gatherer, and from the stage of hunter-gatherers, we have moved to agrarian society, which took us a long time, very long time, and from agrarian society to what we call it as now, where we are in a global village, connected far more tightly through what we call as internet and many media. Now, this has been our progress. Some people even object to that this was a progress, but I will at this moment of time only make a comment that unless we had made this progress, the world population at this moment of time could not have been supported. So, as Steven Pinker, who is a strong supporter for what we call it as progress, he has already done a good work onto this, including what we call it as a quantitative data as to why and how we have progressed. So we just keep that in mind, and then let us look at two things: the technological bootstrap, and that we will follow it up with what we call it as a conceptual bootstrap. The last gift of evolution to the mankind was thumb, separation of thumb from your palm. This was one single improvement over our ancestors Homo habilis and so many of them, which allowed us to make tools. Before us, all Homo races were tool users but not tool makers. Homo sapiens is the only race which is a tool maker. And that tool making was possible only because the thumb separated and we had a lot of flexibility in terms of handling material objects in as a what we call it as a weapon, and also to make weapons. Using tools was probably 2 million years back also tools were being used, but making tools started only 80,000 years back. So we started with, the last gift, one of the last gifts. There are two of them which we'll talk about. One is the separation of the thumb, and then through stone tools and then fire. Fire means, the very first tool which, really speaking, the Homo sapiens controlled was fire. Okay. Before us, there was no control of fire. All races were afraid of fire. It was Homo sapiens which took the first step to control fire. And the moment the fire was in their controls, this was the biggest achievement in terms of what we call it as a progress development. So stone tools, fire, from fire to axe, and from axe to animal power, then to metals. Metals were quite late in the whole prehistory. You probably all of us know what is the role of metals in our life and how that changed the whole scenario of man's control over nature. Many people think that controlling the nature itself is bad. But let's leave that apart. Then navigation. Navigation has been one of the biggest technology that mankind developed, because unless the navigation mechanisms were developed, probably the human race would have been extinct in what we call it as the Great Migration, where from Africa we spread over the complete globe. And that was only because of navigational tools, and the tools were as simple as locating yourself with respect to stars. Nothing more than that, and then maybe what we call it as a compass, a primitive compass consisting of lodestones. So navigation, then metallurgy, which allowed us to make composite metals. Wheel was one of the biggest inventions of mankind for transportation. Engine, which was the next biggest invention, because it was the engine which allowed non-human power to come into picture. Okay, until that time, either it was a natural energy or a human energy or an animal energy, but not a controlled energy in the form which was made available through engine. Electricity was the next biggest step. I'm not going to trace it in great details because our time is very small. And then from electricity and engines and mechanical these things, we moved to machines, and from machines to what we call it as automation, which was further fueled by what we call it as electronics revolution. Then from mechanical and electronics we built robots, and from electronics alone we built computers, and then we married computers and robots, and uh, we have working automation almost to the level of what we call it as not automation level but to the autonomy level. Autonomy means the inanimate thing on itself will be able to take certain kinds of decisions. So, and the last but the most important invention in the technological bootstrap was improvement of our communication, and that was internet is only the pinnacle of that. Many people think that science precedes technology. It's not quite true. Actually, for quite some time to come, it was technology which preceded science, and later science has preceded technology, and then by using scientific principles, we have been able to make better and better tools, and that switchover from what we call a technology leading and science following, the inversion came in somewhere when it was thermal engines, and the attempts to make engines more powerful, okay, gave rise to something which we call it as thermodynamics, which was a topic in physics which was very difficult. Even today, thermodynamics is a topic which is extremely difficult in all of the physics. Uh, why so? Let's not worry about that. Now let us look at a conceptual bootstrap. And the conceptual bootstrap actually started from the nature script, which we call it as speech. Speech was the nature script. Okay. The moment we had a speech, there was no time lag from speech to what we call it as language. It was language which was essential to collate all kinds of technology, all kinds of information into a single whole and pass it on from generation to generation. Okay? So this is what we call it as a exomatic knowledge base or exomatic development. Okay, that means it is not now only with a single person, but it is with the complete race of humans. So it was the language which gave us that power, and this was a point of bootstrap. Okay. From the language, then we developed various, and since we didn't have the mechanisms of writing or mechanisms of printing, they were long due, but they came into existence only in the 16th or 17th century. But before that, the whole knowledge was passed by using rhymes, okay, and gossips, essentially, and not a foolproof mechanism, but a mechanism which could transcend the ideas from generation to generation. Then came religion, and when we say religion, it is always associated with God, and it is very easy to say that whether God exists or doesn't exist, it's not more, no more required, and so on and so forth. But imagine the situation when you were somewhere in a jungle, in a cave, okay, and with all wild animals roaming around, okay. The only hope that the mankind had that they will survive was provided by God. If that concept wouldn't have been there, probably we wouldn't have had a hope, because physically speaking, we are inferior to many species. But the concept of God gave us the hope. Okay, of course, every concept comes with a baggage, and that baggage is not quite true. But we acknowledge the importance of God in the development of the human race. After that, religion, which was basically commandment based, and from that commandment, the real challenge to the religion was when writing started. Okay, we are not going to trace it to any great extent. However, from year about 2000 years back, developments in mathematics started. Actually, philosophy was later, mathematics was first, navigation was first. Okay, and mathematics for navigation was still earlier. And then philosophy developed, and it was the first breakaway from religion. Philosophy was a thinking pattern which was the first breakaway from religion. And then we had the printing mechanism, and the moment there was a printing mechanism, we had a mechanism to have mass communication, and then the knowledge started to spread to the masses. Okay, until it was only concentrated in what we call it as elites. Okay, so transfer of knowledge from elites to general public only started when printing came into picture, which was again a bootstrap point. Then experiments. Science was dealt with even Greeks in the older days, but the real good science, as we know of it today, only started with Galileo. Galileo is, according to me, the forefather of science, because he was the first one to say that to settle the questions, whether in philosophy or whether in science, okay, you need to make experiments, and whatever are the results of the experiment, probably you have to accept them. And that part of acceptance was not a pill which could be swallowed by many of the, for example, church. So even scientists had to pass through a very rough period in 1600. It was not in easy cake as it is today, that anybody can become scientist and can spurt out anything which he feels, okay, which is the state today. So we developed experiments, mechanism of experiments, science progressed. Experiments guided us that we need to make theories, predict, and then make experiment, correct if the corroboration is not right, and so on and so forth. This took for quite some time, including somewhere around up to 1920, until quantum mechanics came into picture, where making experiments was virtually impossible. Whatever experiments we can make today, they were not possible in 1920. For example, uh, the LIGO or the gravitational waves were detected only a year and a half back, which were predicted through theories by Einstein long time back in 1915. So current state of science is, however, that we probably can never build experiments, because if we are talking about black holes and big bangs, how do you simulate? How do you make experiments, physical experiments? And this was the point at which the science has broken away from what we call it as classical science. That you have to give up that every time you will be able to make experiment. Maybe the theories which we put forward should must be logically consistent. There are no two things about it, but you must always be able to simulate them and then look for the answers, because whatever cannot be done physically can still be done as a simulation on computers. And this point became available to us only after probably the year 1990. Even up to 1990, the power of computers was not good enough to test the theories of physics and of knowledge in general. theories of physics, okay, to any great extent, albeit they were simulations, not physical, because physically we can never test them. Okay, so there was a break point. There was a break point both in technology as well as in science, and that break point was that you had to give up something which was cherished long time back by mathematicians and scientists. Okay, that you must always get the right answer all the time. Okay, many false, many failed attempts, not false, many failed attempts on AI in terms of language recognition and language translations were done long time back before probably 2000, okay, which were doomed to failure. And some of the results which we see in AI today are there only because technology broke away, as science also broke away from that very paradigm that you must get a right answer all the ways, always, all the time. The moment this condition was relaxed, okay, engineers knew this pretty well, that you can never get a right answer always, all the time, and accurate enough. Okay, but you can get accurate enough answers which are of practical value. Okay, science learned that a little later. Okay? But that is the break point of science as well as technology. And whereas that led us to now, okay, that led us to what we call it as a bootstrap. Okay, and that bootstrap we call it as a singularity. There is no doubt that technology and science has improved our quality of life. Okay, if somebody says that it has not, probably we can ignore it. The best we can do is ignore it. But when we are in year 2017, 2018, and say 2020, within here, we are at a threshold. We are at a threshold which the threshold is called as a singularity. Let us see what we mean by singularity. Okay? And what are the problems that singularity is going to put forward to us to solve. The singularity concept of singularity comes in various disciplines. Mathematics is one discipline. For example, a well-behaved function, for example, a continuous function, there are no singularities. Singularities in mathematics relate to something where a function, and a function is nothing but a mathematical edifice which describes the practical world. So there are certain functions which at certain points can behave in a very different manner. They can make jumps, they can go to infinity, plus infinity, they can go to minus infinity in value, they can oscillate madly at that particular point, and so on and so forth. That is a mathematical singularity. We'll leave it with mathematicians and move forward to something which we call it as physical singularities. We will move towards to something which we will call as physical singularities. We will spend some time on physical singularity, and then we will look at what is meant by a technological singularity. A physical singularity corresponds to events in physical world, and a technological singularity corresponds to something which we call it as events or states in development of technologies. So first let's look at physical singularities. I believe that I am audible to the last. The first singularity that has occurred ever is the Big Bang. Okay, we don't know what it was before Big Bang. Okay, probably the scientists claim that they know, but let's forget that. The first singularity in the physical world was Big Bang. So if you look at the first line on this, Okay, we are talking about physical singularities, and the second line, as it is at the bottom, uh, these are the enabling conditions for that singularity to occur, physical singularity to occur. Now, if Big Bang was the first singularity by which out of nothingness, out of physical vacuum, which probably is not nothing, it is something much more than what we generally understand. So out of nothing, in a colloquial sense, matter emerged. It was matter which has come into existence at the point of Big Bang, and that is the start point of our whole of the universe as we know it. The second singularity occurred. The event of Big Bang was roughly around 14 billion years back. That's about 1400 crore years back. The astronomical figures are very difficult to grip. Okay, but let's keep at it. The next singularity occurred only about 4 billion years back. That means from 14 billion years to 4 billion years, virtually there was no point of singularity. Things were forming. Okay, for example, forming of the suns, forming of the galaxies, then the suns and the solar systems, and so on and so forth. But the life emerged on surface of the earth about 4 billion years back, and they were viruses. After 4 billion years, okay, then the life continued and culminated itself into something which we call it as the human race. Okay, the most successful form of the life. And we are all aware of that this happened through something which we call it as evolution, and the natural evolution also is a bootstrap. Why it is a bootstrap? Because that species which had genetic mutation and which helped them to survive better, okay, that species survived in number, okay, to give rise to the next species. I mean, to give rise to the next generation. The next singularity, physical singularity, which occurred after life is consciousness. When consciousness really occurred in the physical world is very difficult to pinpoint. Okay. 80,000 years back, Homo sapiens were there, and presumably Homo sapiens had consciousness, at least a primitive consciousness. The terms in humanities are quite ill-defined. God knows why, but they are quite ill-defined. Some of the reasons why they are ill-defined is all these terms are what we call it as composite terms. They are not single properties. It is a culmination of number of properties together, and that's why they are difficult to capture. They are very difficult to grip. So the next singularity, as we are talking about, after life was consciousness, and the next singularity that is looming on us at this moment of time is what we call it as a symbiosis. And what that symbiosis, okay, in the new terminology, not in the terminology of the biology, because I couldn't find a better word, because symbiosis has been practiced in biology by different species. Okay, the same concept probably we have to follow, but the species are going to be different. So I retained the word, what we call it as symbiosis. Okay, so the next singularity is going to be symbiosis. Now, from Big Bang, before we could go to life, we had to pass through the birth of a solar system, and from life, before we could move towards consciousness, we had to pass through a stage called as animals, where emotions were already emergent. And from consciousness, before we could pass to symbiosis, we had to do a lot of work by the race in terms of conceptual and technological bootstrap. And Cro-Magnons was one of the, it was Cro-Magnons. I mean, when we took over, bad word, but Whether we really took over Neanderthals or not is a question of debate. Neanderthals were our cousins in all respect, like us. Okay, however, they lost the race, and probably one of the reasons they lost the race was the social ties were much weaker in Neanderthals. But leaving that aside, if it is Cro-Magnons, it is the Cro-Magnons which created what we call it as the real good technological bootstrap, and they have brought us to something which we call it as a symbiosis. Now, the technological singularity is the hypothesis. I mean, this hypothesis was done by mathematician and the forefather along with Turing, John von Neumann for the computers. Okay, Turing and Neumann were the two people to which we can safely say that they conceived what is a computer, what should be a computer. So he in 1950 predicted that the technological singularity is the hypothesis that the invention of artificial superintelligence will abruptly trigger runaway technological growth, resulting in unfathomable changes in human civilizations as we know of it today. And this is what was predicted by John von Neumann in 1950, when the only computer existing at that time was probably ENIAC, which was made from uh, vacuum tubes and so on and so forth. And probably the 3-year child now, which possesses the mobile, is at least several orders of magnitude powerful than that computer. So, to give you just an idea as to where we have been from 1950. So this was predicted by John von Neumann. So let's look at it a little more carefully, what we mean by a singularity. Now, we have on one side of it, if you look at this graph, we have on the y-axis, okay, the intellectual power or intellect in general, and on the x-axis it's the timeline. Okay. The green line is what is indicated by human intellect. It is the green line which is the human intellect. And here is a date 1950, if I mistake not, yeah, from where there is a exponential growth in the computing power 1950 onwards. And at 2020, probably we are on the verge of quantum computers. Far more powerful, very difficult. It is very difficult to describe the power, but far more powerful than we can imagine at this moment of time. Now, to give you some idea how powerful they were, or not they were, they are, let's look at two supercomputers. One is known as Deep Blue, which was designed by IBM, and it was the Deep Blue which beat Garry Kasparov in 1996 in chess. Conclusively defeated. Until that time, it was believed that chess is one human activity where machine can never beat a human being. Okay, but that happened in 1996, and also DeepMind, which was designed by the Google team, and it beat a Go champion. Go is a game again, like chess is a game, Go is a game. Go is a much difficult game because it has far more possibilities that can be in the game than what we have in the chess. And it was Les Sedol was the human Go champion, and he was bet in year 2017, that's a year back, by DeepMind. So that's the kind of the power that the machines now possess. This is awesome. This is awesome. So the point of singularity is the point where the machine intellect is going to overtake the human intellect. If you look at the human intellect, it has been growing steadily, a little better than a linear growth, okay, and the machines started or computers started in 1950, and within probably 75 years they are already going to overtake us in intellectual activities. Now, a point of bootstrap can be variously defined. It is the point where the human culture, okay, is going to remain no more like a culture which we had been experiencing even through our lives. Okay, as far as my grandfather is concerned, probably nothing happened in his life. As far as my father is concerned, probably telephones had entered. As far as I am concerned, probably when I was a 22-year kid, okay, the computers were barely there. The chip which I held onto my hand in year somewhere around in 1973 was an operational amplifier which costed that time 50 rupees. Okay, and 50 rupees had a lot of value that time. And now probably in the same size, probably I have an unbelievable power in computing. So I have moved, fortunately, I have moved through the whole of the technological singularity up to this point, 2020. Probably I will survive to see the real singularity coming into picture because it is not very far off. On the other hand, so bootstrap is that particular point. Bootstrap is where the machines will automatically learn themselves to become better and better. They will be able to bootstrap their knowledge and processing power, okay, which will be better than the human power, human intellect. As far as the human intellect is concerned, we have two types of intellects. One is a genetic intelligence and one is a memetic intelligence. Meme is a term which is used by Dawkins, and it is a knowledge capsule to describe it in a colloquial terms. A meme is a knowledge capsule. For example, to give you an example, what is a knowledge capsule? Uh, Feynman, when he started his lectures on physics, he said in his very introduction, he said that suppose one day the whole of the humanity vanishes from the surface of the earth due to some astronomical mishap. Okay, but the life as we know it will survive because it has life as we know it also has gone through these erasures, mass erasures, several number of times. Okay, before we are here. So if this happens, if something of this kind happens, the life again has bootstrapped itself. So what is the message that we would like to leave it to the generations which are going to evolve again? So he said that only one sentence, everything is made of atoms. Then everything is made of atoms is what we call it as a meme. It's a capsule, it's a knowledge capsule. Okay. This was the and then another like uh, like gene spreading, the memes also spread throughout the society in a awful at an awful speed. So humans have two kinds of intelligence. One is a genetic intelligence, and another is a mimetic intelligence. And a lot of research has been done on genetic intelligence, and it has been probably proved that we are dumber. We as human beings today are dumb than our counterparts when they were hunter gatherers. Okay, and the reason, the basis on which this was done was that the hunter gatherer had to face a number of different challenges for survival that the individual today doesn't have to face. So the mechanism of genetic selection is no more becoming applicable. That's why we are becoming dumber. There is another research which says we as a human race, okay, are becoming more intelligent, more and more intelligent. And this research was based on what we call it as the IQ values of people all around the world, okay, leaving the demographic conditions, okay, that means in terms of comparison of absolute values, okay, everybody had made at least a 10% or increase everywhere. This means we are becoming memetically more intelligent but genetically dumber. The net total is that we still are able to barely break away from the linear growth in our intelligence, and the rate at which machines are becoming intelligent, okay, is no comparison. We are at no comparison. Their rate is accelerating and still accelerating. It's a runaway acceleration. That's what we call it as a bootstrap. So this is a singular bootstrap, and who has brought this who has brought this singularity into existence? It is we. It is our technology which has brought us here together. Good or bad? I am not making any comment on this, which we will be subsequently making in the session 2 or end of this session probably. When people look around such news like the machine has bet Kasparov, machine has bet the Go champion and so on and so forth, they get odd. Okay. At this moment of time, there is nothing to get odd. Okay. What we need to do at this moment of time is to define the ill-defined term called as intelligence. Okay. Now, what really is intelligence? Okay, so let's spend some time on capturing this particular concept. We distinguish between two things. Okay. One, uh, a specific expertise, and another we call it as a general intelligence. These two terms are different. At this time, I remember a story. I think it was a Bengali philosopher, Chakradhar, if I mistake not. He was moving through a boat in the Ganges, okay, and he asked that nowadays, do you know this? Do you know this? He said, no, I don't know anything of this. So he said, then your life is worthless. Then after some time, the weather had become rough and a very difficult situation for navigate the boat. So that nowadays asked him, sir, do you know how to swim? He said, no, I don't know how to swim. Then he said, then probably, okay, I am going to survive, but not you. Okay? So you have to distinguish between what exactly is specific expertise and what is a general intelligence. These two terms are different. Okay, I am not saying that the machines will not beat us in general intelligence. All that I am saying is we are today at 2020, we are at a juncture where we have already lost our case as far as the specific intelligence or specific expertise is concerned on virtually any field, any human field that we can talk about singly. Okay, we have already lost that race. Okay, we have still not lost our race in terms of general intelligence. Okay, the machines have to do a lot of hard work still to beat us in general intelligence. So let's have a look at what we mean by a specific expertise in short and general intelligence. Specific expertise is being best in a narrow domain. General intelligence is being effective in many domains. These two things are different. Specific expertise, say for example, is being Gary Kasparov or Deep Blue, and general intelligence is something like being Leonardo da Vinci or Sophia. Okay, Sophia is the first example which possesses a little bit general intelligence. Okay, Sophia is the robot which eventually, as you all probably know, has got the citizenship of Saudi Arabia. Specific expertise requires several iterations in same situations, while general intelligence breadth, requires encounters in different situations. I missed one point. Specific expertise requires, as we know, depth of knowledge, while general intelligence requires breadth of knowledge. Okay, these are complementary terms. One cannot be replaced by the other. Acquisition, specific expertise In specific expertise, acquisition and actuation skills are secondary, processing skill is primary, while in general intelligence, acquisition and actuation skill is primary, processing skill is secondary, because we have to survive in different situations, in different encounters. Specific expertise is structural richness in a hierarchical way, in a single domain in a hierarchical way, while structural richness, when it is horizontal, okay, across domains, we call it as a general intelligence. Processing in specific expertise is expand, rearrange, and summarize. These are the only three, really speaking, uh, mechanism by which processing takes place. While in case of processing in general intelligence, it is transform your problem to other domain, see if you have a solution there. If it has a solution, transform the solution back in the current domain and try to survive. This mechanism is entirely different. The specific expertise will require strategies which are mathematical, while general intelligence requires strategies which are heuristic. Heuristic means they may not work always, they may not give me a correct answer, absolutely correct answer. It may be approximate, but most of the times it will work. And that is the point which science and technology has picked it up, because that's the key point for general intelligence. Unfortunately, we don't have quantitative measures for specific expertise and general intelligence. Only functional relationships we know. That measure of specific expertise is based on hierarchical depths that you have, and measure of general intelligence is based on the number of different domains you know. I might give an example to make things clear here. Take, for example, the word buoyancy. If I am an expert, the moment I hear a word buoyancy, okay, a lot of things come to my mind. Okay, buoyancy means the one which is floating, okay, must have a density smaller than the density of the medium in which it is floating. What should be the relationship between these two densities? How do we calculate these densities? Okay, if we have to make it buoyant always, all the time, what we should ensure, and so on and so forth, going vertically down. If a general, if I am a person who believes in general intelligence, and if I hear the word buoyancy, a lot of things come to my mind like that expert, but the things are different. The moment I hear buoyancy, I know I can float, I can float, the birds can float, okay, the ships can float on sea, okay. Probably they have a common characteristic as to why they float. A fly floats, maybe there could be floating objects without having the relationship between what we call it as the density of one has to be greater than the density of other, and so on and so forth. For example, I can float by a magnetic force, and so on and so on. So if you think, when you hear a word called as buoyancy, if these things come to your mind, you are a generalist. Okay, and how to calculate as to when a particular object will float into a particular area, you are definitely an expert. Okay, so this is the real difference between what we call it as expertise and intelligence. At this moment of time, I'm going to introduce two terms here. One, I will call it as ROSEP, and other I will call it as a SciSec. Now, this is the right time at this moment of time, okay, to summarize something on the frame that you are looking at, presentation frame. If you look at in this right hand this thing, you will see that at the bottom we have a virus, and the strand which you are seeing is my genetic chromosome strand, which has brought me to the Homo sapiens, which will ultimately may get elevated to a state which we call it as sapien. Sapien, the meaning of the word sapiens, okay, is wisdom. The meaning of the term, the real term sapiens is wisdom, and Homo sapiens means the species Homo with wisdom. Okay. If you look at the right, I mean left hand side, we have started with something we like spanners and hammer, and this is my chain, physical chain, which has brought me to the computers via what we call it as robo here. Probably it's not visible in this frame. Via robo, and in the evolutionary chain or evolutionary bootstrap, it was a dog. Via dog, they have come here, and then we get into something which we call it as a ROSEPs. That means the machines acquiring wisdom. And on the other hand side, on the other side, we honing our wisdom to a much greater level. So, for ROSEPs to compete with SciSeps, they have to ascend from specific expertise to general intelligence to sentience, then benevolence, and then to wisdom. Okay, so we will eventually be defining these terms. We have defined only what is expertise and general intelligence. We eventually define what we mean by sentience and benevolence and then wisdom. Unfortunately, we do not have quantifiable definitions of expertise, intelligence, sentience, benevolence, and wisdom. The urgent need of the day is that we should, in the first place, make at least a common acceptable definitions of this and then try to quantify them. Unless you quantify something, we will not be able to control it. One thing is very simple. The key to control lies in quantification, and we forget control over these terms or these characteristics. We don't have even definitions for this. That's the dismal state of what we call it as humanities today. We need to change that very urgently if we have to deal with something which we call it as a technological bootstrap. Else, the result is going to be clear that the ROSEPs will overtake us. Okay? Or we will say machines will overtake Homo sapiens. If we don't want that to happen, we need to act fast and act really fast. Now, this is the part we have started refining our understanding of the problem that is facing us. Okay, how urgent is this? Okay, people think, oh, forget it. If it's not going to happen in my lifetime, okay, and if it is not going to happen in my son's lifetime or my grandson's lifetime, just forget it. If humanity had forgotten this, okay, the race would not have survived. There are two biological pursuits which nature has given to us. One is survival of the self, and second, survival of the race. Okay. What is at stake is not survival of the self. Okay. We have done much better by technology as far as survival of the self is concerned. But while doing so, we have to come to a state where the survival of the race is at stake. Okay, this is the point of singularity. Now, in order to give it still a little flesh, as we call it. Okay, we will move through 3 more slides here. One we'll call it as walks of life, and then we'll look into something which is called as internal world, and something which we will call it as external world, and then collate all these things together in a problem definition. The walks of life, we have two worlds within as we know it. This is from an individual's point of view. We have two worlds. One is an internal world, which is a subjective world, and one is an external world, which we sometimes call it as objective world. Okay, there are little differences between subjective world and internal world. There are, and as also objective world and external world. Let's leave it at this moment of time. We roughly understand what we mean by that. Now, the technology which we develop, and the technological bootstrap via tools and fire, okay, and the philosophy which we develop, and the conceptual bootstrap via speed and printing, okay. Philosophy and technology culminated into a science, and it was technology which was ahead, philosophy which was ahead, then science is ahead, and now technology and philosophy are lagging. Technology is not so much lagging, philosophy is lagging a bit. Philosophy is lagging quite a bit now, which never was there. Okay, so that culminated into science, and then we, through science and through the conceptual bootstrap, we developed something which we call as the axiomatic knowledge base, which we talked upon, and we developed something which we call an axiomatic technology base. That means whatever technology we develop today, okay, it's passed generation to generation. Okay? This is what we mean by axiomatic term. The walks of life do not only end into something which we call it as philosophy, science, and technology, which have much more than that. Uh, every person, every individual has pursuits, which we call it as human pursuits. Okay. And what are these human pursuits? Okay, could be a lot of debate on that. But people think that since there could be debate on a concept, okay, a concept can never be defined. But I believe that even though there are debates, there are certain things which you call it as a common denominator, which will be agreed upon by all. They cannot dare to say that this is not a pursuit. Okay, they can say that a certain thing is not a pursuit, but there are definitely certain things which everybody will agree to, which we call it as human pursuits. One of the human pursuits, okay, is survival. And when we talk about survival, we are not talking about only survival of the self, we are talking about the survival of the self and survival of the race. Okay, and from this individual pursuit, we can split, we can create a tree of smaller pursuits. Okay, and so on and so on. These are our guidelines for our behavior, or living the life. Okay, these are the guidelines for living the life in a certain way. Similarly, after survival comes pleasure. If the survival is at stake, there is no question of pleasure. I mean, this was pretty nicely expressed by what we call it as hierarchy of needs by Maslow. Okay, let's not go into that. Uh, we have the pleasure needs, and pleasure needs also can be split into a tree of sub goals or sub pursuits. And then virtues. Virtues correspond to something which dictate us that we follow certain kinds of social norms. Okay? And social behavior, social norms, I mean, adhering to social behavior, social norms is called as uh, virtues. And freedom and hope. I mean, human likes to be in a group. Okay. One of the reason why human wants to remain in a group, okay, has a biological basis or evolutionary basis. In a group, you are more safe. You have better security. In a group, you have better security. Okay. That means you can fight against calamities in a much better fashion. So, but at the same time, if you are in a group that poses certain kinds of restraints on you, and at the same time you want that you should have freedom, okay, and a lot of freedom hypes have been there recently, need to be verified. But we have human pursuits. It is the human pursuits are different and values are different. Value is a different entity altogether. Okay. In all subsequent presentation, we will be talking again and again about two values. Okay. One we'll call it as a personal quality of life. The two values which are important to us, one is a personal quality of life and other is a social quality of life. And the social pursuits probably could be providing stress-free life for all through abundance, security, freedom, and governance. So this is the social context in which, okay, we have to deal with the technological singularity. Now, the next two slides which I am going to cover are going to take me a little more time for each of these. One will be what we call as the internal world, and the other will I will call it as an external world. Let's go and have a look at what we mean by the internal world. Physically, the internal world is governed by 25,000 genes and 100 billion neurons. Okay. If I am a reductionist, as I call it, okay, what is the basis of my internal world? It is the basis. My whole of my internal world is governed by 25,000 genes and 100 billion neurons. These are all that is there to these. Please keep these figures in mind: 25,000 genes and 100 billion neurons, because they are important when we will be talking about the size of the singularity which we are talking about, or the singularity or the machine intelligence which has to reach to this stage. We have two kinds of world, internal worlds. One we call it as a shadow of the external world. Okay, and when we talk about a world, it is not a static world. It is the encounters of the self with the rest of the world. Okay, and they are stored in that particular experiences. Experiences are not static. Okay, associated with them, where a whole, what we call it is a whole trajectory of things that happen. So shadow of the external world is our internal world, and there is another internal world which we call it as a conceptual world or conceived world, and that is my own creation. Okay? It is not the shadow of the external world. All these two terms are pretty important, because if machines have to overtake us, okay, they have to excel in these things. Behavior is governed by qualitative experience base. What is qualia? Qualia is the subjective feeling. I mean, it's a subjective interpretation of the external world or internal world. It's far more subjective. And in a subjective world, there is no knowledge. There are experiences. The knowledge of that is of no great importance. Information content of that is not important. The experience is more important. Experience is a better word to use for the I mean, for the qualitative testing. So behavior is governed by qualitative experience base plus pursuits that we have, and obviously values which are aligned with the pursuits. And on the second side of it, it is the cognitive knowledge base and the inferences which we can draw. Okay. To explain you what is the difference between subjective world of qualia and objective world of information or knowledge. Let's describe an event. Suppose somebody comes and kicks you in the ass. Okay, there are two things which happen. One, that a thing which happens is what we call it as a mental kick, and second thing which happens is what we call it as a physical kick. The pain of the physical kick is far less than the pain of the mental kick. Okay, so the pain of the mental kick is what we call it as qualia. Pain of the physical kick is what we call it as information. Okay. So qualitative experience is quite different from knowledge, and the behavior is governed by both of them. Then we have two more things. One we call it as a consciousness, and one we call it as a cognition. These are again the two terms which are ill-defined, and there is a need to describe them in a much clearer way. Consciousness corresponds to what we call it as it's a composite term. Consciousness is a composite term. Uh, for a human to be conscious, all of these have to be there. One, awareness of space and time. The extent of space and the extent of time to which a person is aware is far more than the extent of space and the extent of time which a dog is aware. Dog is also aware, but its sphere of spatio-temporal sphere is far too less. Okay. Second thing is that for consciousness, you need to be aware that there is an external world, okay, of which you are also a part, but the external world is apart from you being existing. There are certain other things which also exist in the world. That's what we call it as an awareness of the external world, and also the awareness of the internal world, which we talked about. Okay? And lastly, awareness of myself and awareness of free will. This is the pinnacle as far as the consciousness is concerned. So if we have to go for quantitative definitions, we have to deal with this, such a composite concept or such a composite property called as consciousness. Cognition, on the other hand, is not only information, it is information and interpretation or understanding. This is one part of cognition, and the second part of cognition is more or less what we call it as a uh, physical basis in which we can store, process, and communicate. So this is what we call it as cognitive components and consciousness components. Our window to the external world is through what we call sensors and actuators. The five senses which we have and the five actuating mechanisms that we have. This is our window to the external world. Machines and animals, okay, are at the lowest rung. Animals have emotion, machines have information. Machines can deal with information. Animals can also deal with emotions. If we are on the cognitive path, it is not only information, it's not only data processed into information, it is also what we call it as interpretation of that information or understanding of that information. And unless we have understanding of information, we cannot have a property called as reason. Okay. Robots, for example, are at this moment of time, they have sensors and actuators. They can convert data to information. They can interpret the data, albeit in a specific domain. They can reason also if they have to take action. On the other hand, We have the animals which have emotion, and then we have the higher forms of life, like humans, who have qualia, that is the subjective experience which we are talking about, and intuition. Intuition is something which is uniquely human, and for machines to possess intuition, we still have time. We still have time to act before they enter into that zone. Sentience is a composite concept again, which consists of emotions, qualia, intuition together, and we normally club it under a single this thing, which we call it as feeling. One is a feeling world, another is a thinking world, and intelligence is concerned with thinking. It is not concerned with what we call it as feeling. Whether the intelligence is a specific expertise or whether it is a general intelligence, it is still a thinking activity. It is not a feeling activity. Now, we can raise several questions at this moment of time as to say that if there is no sentience, can there be intelligence? Okay, many of such questions will come into picture. On the cognitive path, we have something which we call it as a prudence. And on the sentience path, we will have a higher entity called as morality. Okay, which again, so right hand side, if you look at this right hand side, okay, it is all uniquely human. On the left hand side, the humans do possess them, okay, but machines also possess them. Let's acknowledge the fact that the machines are going to possess them. And the last is the wisdom. Now, this means that the wisdom has two angles, or wisdom has two things. One, a morality aspect, another is a prudence aspect. Okay. As far as the prudence aspect is concerned, machines will definitely reach wisdom. Now, this is what we call it as an internal world. And this internal world is going to be possessed not only by humans, it is also going to be possessed by machines. They are also going to be possessed by Rosepians. Both Roseps and Siceps have internal world plus pursuits and should have identity, autonomy, and social rights. And the first instance of a robot getting social recognition, social right is Sophia. People think that this is a unique and single off the beat event, okay? But nobody knows that this is we are throwing a matchstick into a dry jungle. Okay, where it will move towards, we are at this moment of time, we are not quite aware of what is going to happen. These are only indicators. A deep blue as a computer is an indicator, a Sophia is an indicator, the deep mind is an indicator, and so on. They are not what we call only unique, these things. This movement is going to gather an exponential rate of expansion. Now, if you look at this triangle, which I have projected at this moment of time, this shows that this triangle here at this particular point, okay, is intelligence and it is going down. This triangle describes the Proceps at this moment of time. They have at this moment of time, okay, a coverage on the internal world. It's an internal world coverage which is depicted in the triangle. As far as the humans are concerned, this is what we have. The violet one, yes, violet one, and It not only contains the green triangle, it also contains many more things like feeling, sentience, feeling, morality, and wisdom, prudence. Everything is there. The point here is the point of singularity. Okay, from this point onwards, okay, things are going to start changing. We are somewhere at this point in year 2018, and we have still not reached singularity. We'll reach singularity when the machine intelligence will become greater than the human intelligence, and it's not very far off. So this is what we say internal world, and when we talk about internal world, we have always been taught conventionally, academically, we have been taught, okay, that the internal world is possessed only by humans, their prerogative. Okay, nobody else has internal world. Wrong. Wrong. If this is what academics is telling us, okay, uh, we need to we need to change that very fast, because the ROSEPs are have already covered the green triangle. Okay, when they will start expanding to cover the area marked by the violet one, we will never know. The moment they pick up something which we call it as bootstrap ability, which a lot of experiments are going on, okay, there is no guarantee that this internal world also be the internal world of a Rosapien, not only Sisapiens but also a Rosapiens. So this is where this is the gap. This is the gap which exists. This particularly is the gap which is existing between Roseps and Siseps at this moment of time. Filling this gap, how much time will be required to fill this gap up is what we are debating, what is being debated actively. Now, due to this internal world which is possessed by us as humans, there are certain unique activities which humans pursue. These are, say for example, sports is one such activity and arts is another activity. And arts is concerned with what we call it as value, aesthetic value. Okay. So sports and arts to a certain extent are human activities. Products and services is a prerogative of ROSEPs. Okay. That means all the external world which is being controlled by, I mean, products and services, okay, we make them, but actually we don't make them now because it is not our human physical effort that goes into it. It's only the mental effort that goes into it. Okay, so products and services is the output of the internal world of the Rosapiens, while sports and arts and conceptions of products and services is the outcome of the internal world of Sisapiens. Apart from this, there is something which we call it as meme. And a meme is nothing but, as I said, meme is nothing but an encapsulated knowledge, okay, and it comes out of research and technology. Okay, research in science, in not only science, in humanities, in science, in philosophy, okay, to that extent maybe also in religion, less likely, but still in religion. Okay, all of them are there. Okay, and they produce memes. Okay, so memes is a external entity. Memes has got its existence of its own. It is not a physical entity. Okay, so these are the outputs of our internal world. So the summary of this is that here afterwards we have to consider that the internal world is possessed both by Sisapiens, yet to be Sisapiens, and Rosapiens, yet to be Rosapiens, so humans and machines at this point of time, intelligent machines. Okay, but they both are going to possess internal world, and unless there is an internal world, okay, machines overtaking us doesn't exist. Okay, unless the whole gamut of this is covered by machines, machines overtaking us does not exist. They may possess specific expertise. Okay, they may possess general intelligence to a certain extent also, not only specific expertise, general intelligence also to a certain extent, but okay, something which we call it as sentience and something which we call it as morality and prudence. Okay, and within sentience, morality, and prudence, are these terms applicable to Homo sapiens? Okay, this is something which are our new questions. These are our new challenges which we have to answer. Okay, so this is it. So we have to understand the internal world very correctly. Okay, I am also working in an area called as Internet of Things, and there are three things that are essential for a inanimate asset, whatever it may be. Air conditioner is an asset, for example. There are three things that have to be there. Communication on their own is first requirement. Second, model of the internal world and the external world, which we call it as cyber models, that they have to be there. And third thing is autonomy. That means they don't have to be guided by any external entity. And if there has to be an autonomy, there has to be a goal, there has to be a pursuit. Okay, and every asset, IoT enabled asset, has a digital identity, has cyber models, has autonomy, and a peer-to-peer communication. Okay, we are moving towards that world. Our next inhabitants of the world are not going to be only plants, animals, and humans, and bacteria and so on, but they are also going to be IoT-enabled devices or IoT devices. Okay, we are going to be living in a world of this kind. This is the type of the external world that we are expecting to arise in time to come. And this time to come is not more than 30 years, okay, as a what we call as a median projection of future. 20 years as an optimistic projection, and 70 years at the maximum. That means you can say that with 99% guarantee, okay, 20, I mean 20, another 70 years you have a world of that kind. Okay, it is not that that means people born and not born even at 20s, in their 20s, are going to see this change. It is as urgent as that. Okay, we cannot neglect it, and this is the question which was never there when all the philosophy came into existence. Okay, so as we have given a fair amount of treatment to what we call it as what is an internal world, we'll give a fair amount of treatment to what we call it as what is going to be the external world. Okay? Because the external world is now going to consist of all these things together, and they are going to affect our lives, our own lives. What is going to be the external world? And the external world is going to consist of objects, worlds, processes, and properties. So we'll put some time into this, what we mean by external world. This is a last heavy dose, last heavy conceptual dose, okay, of the problem. After that, what we will be looking at is consequences of this in terms of defining the problem. And then in the session 2, we'll see what kinds of measures are required so that we retain our supremacy as a race. We have studied, all of us have studied through academics, okay, and unfortunately the academics, or fortunately, I don't know, maybe unfortunately or fortunately, it's a viewpoint, that academics was divided into several disciplines, okay. For example, one of the disciplines would have been arts branch, the science branch, the technology, and then commerce branch, and so on. But for example, one example to give as to what happens is to the commerce branch and the technology branch is, take, look at the technology called as blockchain technology, which is the basis of bitcoins or virtual currency. Okay, blockchain pervades the field of commerce. Okay, to an extent where you cannot believe as to what is going to happen. Many people think that bitcoins are going to be banned. They are going to be banned. Whether they are banned or not, it does not matter. What is not going to be banned is blockchain. The reason for this is that technology is different, and a far superior technology of economic exchange. Okay, but we are not at this moment of time. The only thing which I am trying to tell is that dividing the academics into watertight compartments is not quite so, not quite right, not quite right at all. Okay. However, you still have to divide your academics into conventional branches. Like we have the physics, we have the, I mean, coming to science, we have the physics, we have the chemistry, we have biology, we have psychology, sociology, economics, humanities, what not. To a certain extent, they are required. Okay, but they are specific expertises. They are specific expertises. A nicely surviving human requires a general intelligence, not a specific expertise. He requires a general intelligence, and that's exactly what the academics today does not give it to our kids. And who are the kids? The definition of kids has also to be extended. After 22 years, we say that he is no more a kid. I don't think so, because learn from 6 years to maybe 20 to 24 years, and for the rest of the life don't do anything in terms of learning, okay, and still survive. This luxury is not going to be there anymore. This luxury is going to be out, okay, unless you keep up with the knowledge of that particular time. Survival is going to be difficult. So what we urgently need is to restructure the knowledge. Restructure the knowledge based on the fact that people have to survive in an ever-changing world, okay, in a different fashion, altogether different fashion, to which the academics had not even dreamt of. So we will look at an external world in this particular fashion. So the terminology which I will use will be quite alien to you. Um, However, this is the way I look at it, that if you are able to understand the external world, it's a much better way to understand the external world. Okay, as we looked at the internal world, we have to look at an external world also in a different fashion, altogether different fashion. There are inhabitants or inhabitants, not inhabitants, inhabitants in the external world. And what are these inhabitants? They are passive objects. Okay, normally stones and robots. Okay, to give you an example, being all these are passive objects. There are live objects. Okay, as far as passive objects is concerned and live objects is concerned, there's not much of a difference between what academics has taught us. Okay, passive objects were dealt with by physics and chemistry, while live objects are dealt with by the branches called as biology and psychology. Not much different. Intelligent robots. Okay, this has never been dealt with as an object in our study. And conscious objects. This has to a certain extent been dealt with in academics, okay, as human beings, but it was dealt with as being human beings only, nothing else than human beings. The thing is not going to remain that way in another 50 years to 100 years to come. So we need to expand our definitions of intelligent robots to ROSEPs and conscious objects to SICEPs. Sometimes it may be better that we call this terminology as also carbon agents, that's we, and silicon agents, which will be the machines, intelligent machines. So these are the four different categories of objects in the world. Are these the only objects in the world? Okay. Still, we have not gone far away from academics. We are still, we have extended, but not gone far away from it. Formal objects. For example, a formal algorithm is a formal object. A formula is a formal object. A formula in mathematics is a formal object. An algorithm, okay, which solves certain kind of a problem, okay, is a formal object. These are the formal objects, and formal objects are required to describe the external world, as also required to describe the internal world also. Okay, we have a trouble in formal objects. For example, mathematics and algorithms, okay, have been with us for quite some time. Okay, however, they are not good enough. We need something, because we need a universal language, universal formal language to describe the external and the internal world which we are talking about. We have to make a substantial change in our thinking as far as the formal objects are concerned. The next category of the objects are what we call it as virtual objects. This is new. This is entirely new. This never existed before the year maybe 1975. Okay. 1975, I was a postgraduate. 1973 to be precise. But there was nothing like virtual objects. Okay. And what are these virtual objects? Okay. These are the computer creations, these are the machine creations. Virtual objects come into existence through machines. Okay. What these virtual objects are, okay, we will see in a certain way. But before we look at these virtual objects, let us look at it by look at it something which we call it as worlds. Okay, a world is an entity which contains objects. It contains objects, and the objects have interrelationships. They have relationships between them. The objects have relationships between them. Even a conscious, even a human being, okay, and a stone has a relationship. A human being and a hill has a relationship. Okay, so relationships are static, generally static. For most of the time static. They also can change, but they are permanent for fair amount of time. Permanent for fair amount of time. A process is different. In case of a process, the properties take different values. Proper object takes different values for the properties. That's what we call it as the processes. A process is different from relationships. A world consists of a lot of things. It consists of objects, it consists of relationships, okay, it consists of processes. So we have a real world. And what is a real world? Okay, objects with mass existing in world which consists of another objects, other types of objects which also have mass. Okay, virtual objects do not possess mass. That's what separates virtual objects from real objects. So we have a real world, okay, and then we have a virtual world. Anybody who is addict, I'll not say addict, not okay. At this moment of time, I would like to clarify certain things. People think that computer games is a stupid research. Okay, not quite so. For example, the intelligence acquired by DeepMind and DeepMind were in games only. Okay, but they have no more remained games, okay, for entertainment. They have pervaded our actual life. Let's invariably everything will I mean, invariably the games will ultimately end up into something which has got a bearing into the real life, bearing into our life. So virtual world, for example, uh, I do not know how many people will be aware of this. There is something which is called as a world, a virtual world created by MIT, not MIT of Pune, MIT of US, and that virtual world is called as Second Life. Okay, and that game, it is, I mean, very abused as a game. It is abused as a game. It is not really a game. It's a world in itself. And what you can do is you can take an avatar into that world. And what you can do is there are virtual universities, there are virtual cities. You can move through them. You can live in a virtual city. You can buy an apartment. You can stay in that. You can go to a college. You can go to a college in that virtual these things. Okay, learn something, come back, and so on. And there are interfaces by which you can move from your physical world and get into the virtual world. In the sense, your mind will be transported into the virtual world. It is not you as a mass will get into that. Okay, your mind will be so engrossed that your mind will get into that virtual world. We know that. Okay, the soap addicts means soap opera addicts. Okay, if you observe them, if you put a camera and uh, put it onto them as to what are their reactions when they are looking into the soap operas, okay, you will understand many things, that they are no more in their own physical world, they are in the world of that bloody screen. Okay, this is what we mean by a virtual world. Second Life is a virtual world, one of them. There are many such created virtual worlds. For example, there is some virtual world which is created for a specific purpose, okay, to teach people, okay, how to navigate through jungles, okay, through where there are many carnivores and serpents and whatnot, and then it's for teaching. Another good example of a virtual world, okay, which is used for practically excellent values is what is known as the flight simulator. Okay, all pilots, before they can fly a plane, okay, have to go get through a training called as a flight simulator. And when he is in the chair as a pilot in the flight simulator, he is no more a pilot in the real world sitting in a nice this thing. You can see, if you put electrodes in his skull, you will see that he is no more in the physical world, he is in the virtual world. Okay, and while flight simulator have a lot of real value, all the commercial pilots and the military pilots, okay, have are always trained through this, because how can you create situations where there are emergencies and when you are going to get bombed, okay, from underneath or from overneath, and what is going to happen if you are a commercial pilot, and if a rudder breaks, what actions you are supposed to take. And so they are trained in such a fashion. It's a grueling training. Okay, it's a virtual world. So if you think virtual worlds are only for games, far from it, far from it. So this kind of a virtual world was not even imagined when I was already a practicing engineer. When I was already a practicing engineer. So we have a real world or a physical world, and we have a virtual world. But are these the only worlds? Are there any other worlds which we are talking about? Okay, there are, and one we call it as an augmented reality. Okay, and what is an augmented reality? At this moment of time, At a level of what we call it as game, it is Pokemon. All of us have heard what is meant by a Pokemon. And what is in that augmented reality game? You have a mobile, okay, to turn on your camera, okay. The whole, I mean, this will show me the situation, okay, and I will see the audience and everything. I move your camera, everything. I mean, it's like I'm taking a movie, and then I can introduce a virtual object into it. Okay, a virtual object, for example, of a snake, okay, traveling through the auditorium. It's a virtual snake. Okay, when you have a world of that kind, we call it as an augmented reality. This world of augmented reality has been used to a great extent, to a great advantage by architects. They create the whole building in a three-dimensional fashion. Okay, the rooms are there, but devoid of any furniture in it. Okay, right? And then in this real world, okay, I mean, you move to your flat, which is still not furnished. Okay, take this thing and then introduce a bed. Okay, you can place the bed in the actual room and then see, oh, it doesn't look good, oh, I must move it here. You can do all that. And in the augmented reality world, you can furnish your flat by virtual objects before they are converted into physical objects. This kind of a world is called as a augmented reality. There is a counterpart to it, and that counterpart is called as virtual reality. And what is a virtual reality? A virtual reality is real objects in virtual world. Like, for example, I talked about the flight simulator. In case of a virtual world, it is all virtual objects in virtual world. In the real world, it is all physical objects in a physical world. In an augmented reality, it's virtual objects in real world, and in a virtual world, it is real objects mentally into a virtual world. Okay, these are the kinds of the worlds which we are talking about, and they are not restricted only to games. They have surpassed that entertainment level and now have become something which are the excellent tools as far as the technology in various areas are concerned. These are the kinds of the technologies which are coming into picture. Hologram is very, yeah, holograms is also there, but maybe we can answer that when we go to question and answer session. So these are the types of the world. So we have seen what are the objects, we have seen what kinds of worlds are there. Okay, now let us spend some time on what are called as processes. Okay, a relationship or a relation, okay, is a static entity that can exist between two objects. And the objects can be anything, as we have already said. They can be virtual objects, they can be real objects, whatever. Okay, we have five kinds of processes. One, we call it as an entropic process. An entropic process is the process which governs the passive objects in all its forms. For example, is a ball kept at the top of the hill will roll down to the bottom. Okay, this is a process. And in this kind of a process, these processes are called as entropic processes, where the energy gets diluted, dispersed among the various carriers for the energy. Okay, these are called as entropic processes. All physical or passive objects in the real world follow these kinds of processes. Okay, we have never been taught physics in this way, never. Okay, and what is that entropic process? That there are only three rules for the physical objects of the passive objects in the passive world or the real world. One is increase in the entropy, second is minimization of the energy, and the third thing is the shortest path. We haven't taught what is meant by a shortest path. We all know that the light travels by the shortest path, okay, and so on. But these are the processes which govern only the passive objects in real world. What are the processes which govern live objects in the real world? There are different kinds of processes. Okay, we have not been taught in this particular fashion. They are known as ectropic processes. In case of entropy, okay, the structure disintegrates, the energy disperses. In case of ectropic processes, the structure builds up and the energy is concentrated, not dispersed. All these processes are called as ectropic processes. Life is an ectropic process, and that's why emergence of life was a singularity. Okay. So these are the ectropic processes which govern the way live objects exist in the world of passive objects, or rather real world. Okay, they take energy, okay, to maintain their own structure. So these are ectropic processes, they govern the live objects. There are cognitive processes, okay, which are related to something which we call it as processing of information into what we call it as from data to information, information to knowledge, knowledge to understanding, understanding to wisdom, and so on. That particular path. Okay. There are cognitive processes, and then there are emotive processes. Emotive processes are there. Okay. Even in humans, there are emotive processes. Entropic and ectropic processes are physical to a certain extent. I mean, we should describe them in terms of physics. While cognitive and emotive processes, which are internal processes, we cannot describe them purely in terms of physics. Okay, all attempts to describe internal processes via physical processes, okay, are doomed for failure. We have to look for different kinds of techniques. That it has got a physical basis does not mean that everything has to be described in physical processes. This is utterly reductionist view. This is an utterly reductionist view. Okay. So we need different kinds of descriptions for these processes. They are emotive processes and cognitive processes of the internal world. And apart from this, we have the wisdemic processes, which we will eventually make very clear when we go in the second session of this. Okay. Then as we said, we talked about objects, we talked about worlds, we talked about processes, and now we are going to talk about something which is, we call it as properties. A property is possessed by an object, or a property is possessed by a relationship or a relation. Okay, properties change. Property is a dynamic entity, far more dynamic than a relation is. Relations also change, but they change at a much slower rate. Okay, so properties, there are different kinds of properties. The first kind of a property is called as an intrinsic property. That means this particular kind of a property transcends from components to world or systems which comprises the components, and then this system is also in some other new higher system. For example, an aeroplane has a number of components. Okay, aeroplane has a number of components, and each of the component has a mass. And the aeroplane also has a mass. So mass is an intrinsic property which transcends through the objects. Okay, and intrinsic property in the sense the the mass of the aeroplane is equal to sum of the masses of the individual components. These are intrinsic. Mass is an intrinsic property. Charge is an intrinsic. There are several such properties, intrinsic properties. The other kinds of properties are called as emergent properties. The emergent properties cannot be described, okay, by something which is called as by reductionist mechanisms. Okay, for example, sodium chloride, that is salt. Salt is a physical entity. Sodium is a physical entity. Chlorine is a gas. Sodium is a metal. Sodium has certain properties. It has a mass. Chlorine also has a mass. Okay, their states of these two are sodium is solid in the state, chlorine is in the gaseous state. They do not have a property called as saltiness. When sodium and chlorine comes together, okay, and when it becomes salt, okay, the salt will have a mass, okay, which can be correlated to masses of the atoms of the constituents. But the property called as saltiness, okay, cannot be inferred from the intrinsic properties of the components which make them. These properties are called as emergent properties. Okay. Now, one thing also one has to keep it in mind that an emergent property is a property perceived by the supersystem. It is the human being which knows what is meant by salt. I mean, which is saltiness. Okay, it is the human being. That means it is to be judged. That particular property, emergent property, is judged as emergent and given a different this thing by an environment of that particular sodium and chlorine coming together. Okay, so these are emergent properties. Intrinsic properties are different. Emergent properties are different. Okay. All these terms are extremely important when we go to something ROCEPs acquiring something which we call it as the status of humans, absorbent properties. Okay, there are this is a new term, absolutely new term, never discussed up till now. I have never seen it through several browsing of the internet. There is nothing which is mentioned as an absorbent property. Like absorbent property is a dual of emergent property. Emergent property is perceived by the environment or the supersystem. Absorbent property is a property which is perceived by the system, perceived from the supersystem to the system. Okay, this is called as an absorbent property. Consciousness, is it an emergent property or an absorbent property? If we consider it as an emergent property, we are neo-reductionists. If we consider it as an absorbent property, okay, we are neo-mystics, because it is the property which is called as consciousness, which is acquired by a individual object which has sufficient richness in terms of what we call it as components and their interconnections, and consciousness always exists in the environment which is absorbed by that particular object. Okay, then we are neo mystics, and another case we are neo reductionists. Okay, but these are the properties, they exist, we call them as absorbent properties. For example, at the microscopic level, okay, there is something which is known as dual slit experiment. Probably everybody has heard about it. That the electron decides, okay, whether to behave as a particle or whether to behave as a wave, okay, and one does not know why it does so. Okay, the answer to this question is, if I have set up an experiment to measure the wave properties of the electron, it behaves as an wave. If I have set up an experiment to measure its particle properties, then it behaves as a particle. That means somehow we can also say that the electron has an absorbent property called as whether to behave it as a wave or whether to behave it as a particle. Okay, these are absorbent properties, and there are other kinds of properties which we call them as engineered properties. Engineered properties are the properties, okay, which the designer wants to be in the product. Okay, for example, we are not far away from something which is known as a designer's baby. Okay, that means the human genome can be so modified in the, I don't know, in the embryonic state, okay, by genetic manipulations, okay, or genetic techniques. Manipulation is a bad word. Genetic techniques by selecting some genes that, for example, I want the baby to have black hair and blue eyes, which is a rare combination. Okay, but there is a gene which corresponds to black hair, there is a gene which corresponds to blue eyes, and if we can club them together, somehow we can club them together, we have designed the properties of the baby. These are called as designer babies. Okay, not far off, maybe 50 years. Okay, and if you think that the birth was always to be taken, okay, in the mother's womb, okay, that days have passed. We have seen the cloning happening, we have seen that. Whether it was helpful, useful or not is a different story. We did it. Okay. So these are the engineered properties. So these we call them as engineered properties, right? So this is how we should understand the external world. This is a different kind of a view of an external world. Okay, not governed by traditional way of looking at knowledge disciplines. And we need to make that paradigm shift to understand both the internal world as well as the external world, because the type of the challenge which is going to face us, okay, is going to force us to look at it in a different fashion altogether. With that, we move to the next part. I'm almost coming to the end of the session. Uh, Before I move, let's talk about external world in two more things. We talked about relationships, okay, objects and their relationships. Okay, there are two types of relationships which exist in a world which consists of objects, and the objects have properties, okay, and there are processes, okay, which change the properties in terms of magnitude. Okay, there are something which is called as connections, which are responsible for behavior of that particular system together as a human being or as a robot. Okay, those are called as connects, and there are two different kinds of connects. One we call it as a horizontal connects, which are trans-domain connects, okay, and others are systemic connects, okay, vertical connects, which call them as systemic connects. And these are the two connects, okay, which give us something which we call it as the specific expertise or general intelligence, as we call it. With that, this is a different view altogether for what we call it as external world. Now let us, with that, okay, we still have something which we call it as, in the internal world, I said there were 25,000 genes and 100 billion neurons. Neurons were responsible for memetics, and genes are responsible for genetic properties, genetic intelligence, and whatever. Similarly, in the external world, we have 8 billions, 2020, 8 billion humans and 24 billion IoT devices. The current situation is we have somewhere around 7 billion, 7.2 billion people and about 15 billion IoT devices today, okay, which pass the test at least to some extent, not all of them. Okay, there were 4 tests for IoT, true IoT, one, 1 plus 1, 2, and so on. So there are somewhere around 15 billion devices today existing as IoT devices. And in 2020, we may be somewhere around 8 billion, and the IoT devices will rise to 24 billion. This means that the inhabitants of this world are going to be intelligent IoT devices far more than the population of the humans. Okay, look at the size of the problem that we are talking about. With that, we move to the, and we are going to gloss over this side. Okay, these are known as big Qs. We are going to talk about, we are going to take a quick review of what is known as big Qs. why there is something rather than nothing. I mean, these are the kinds of the questions that religion and philosophy and science have and technology have attempted to answer. Okay, why is there something rather than nothing? That means, for example, why the Big Bang came into existence. Okay, why did it not remain as it was? Why is something continually changing? It came into existence fine. It would, if it would have been static, it would have been fine. Why is it changing? Is there a purpose behind the moment we call that there is a change? Okay, the associated Pandora's worm is why is there what is the purpose behind this change? Next, since I am conscious, I know I am, as Descartes says, I know I am a you. I mean, the only knowledge, the only certain knowledge which I have is that I know I am. Okay. So, who am I then? Is there life after death? The biggest trouble or the biggest question that the human being has got, or the biggest fear that the human being has got, is death. Okay, and have I got a free will? Okay, does God exist? Okay, now these are the questions which philosophy tries to answer and religion tries to answer, and the religion has put something which we call it as an edifice called as God into the whole scenario and tried to answer starting from fear of death, to which the answer is karma vipak, to purpose of life. The answer to is getting out of the circles of rebirths and births and rebirths, and or wait until what we call it as day of judgment. Okay, so God tried to answer this. Okay, because giving a hope that there is a life after death is one solace that common man can have. Okay. But we gloss over that. And when we go to science, then it started to answer some big questions like, are the experiences which we have, are they objective? That means whatever experience I have, okay, for a situation in the external world, does another human being have the same kind of experience? Okay, and if only he has got a second, I mean, what we call as a third person view, unless it is there, there is no objective world which is existing. There has been empty number of what we call as philosophical debates on to whether the world is objective or subjective, or there is a God or there is no God. Okay, but none of them has given us the kind of the uh, prosperity which we enjoy today. And if we don't say that we have the prosperity, we are denying something which is in front of us. Okay. Has information to reside in matter or energy only? This is another, I mean, neuroscience as we call them, okay, which is trying to put names of the kind that there exists no free will, is also trying to exist that the information needs to exist, okay, in a media. I don't know what kind of media, okay, which is not matter or energy. Okay, that means if you ask me, science has started moving towards mysticism. Science has started moving towards mysticism. It has lost its touch with reality. Then the questions which are relevant to us, okay, are, can we decide value objectively? Okay. Is there a universal ethics? Which is a great question, for which we have troubles. Okay, I mean, if we have to make something, if we have to look for an answer which is value based, then our biggest trouble is whether there is a universal ethics for which we can, from where we can get the values. Okay, so these are some of the questions which, big questions, which philosophy, then religion, and then science try to answer. And however, we are going to concentrate on a much practical part of it, calling it as looking at a knowledge system which is value based, because that's the only thing which will save us from the singularity which we are talking about. To put it again in a nutshell, theology, that is God, which is revelation, death, solace, and self-purpose was something which at least it gave a partial answer. It is not bad. It was not bad. Okay, if it had not given us that answer, that well, okay, that you are going to survive, you have a hope to survive, we would not have been here. It is the hope which makes आशानां मनुष्याणां काचिदाश्रय शृंखला यया बुद्धः प्रधावन्ति मुक्तः तिष्ठन्ति पंगु. So we would have been of that particular kind. But theology has never given us any kind of social goals, or it was not able to deal with something which is known as problem of evil. Okay, in any way, in any sense, the only philosophy which came near to touching upon problem of evil was Buddhist philosophy. However, that also didn't succeed. Then we have the philosophy, not religion. We have the philosophy which their greatest contribution of the philosophy was to summarize all these big Qs, okay, and not providing a single answer to the big Q. This was the output of philosophy, and I am not saying that. It was Hawkins which said that philosophy is extinct. I am not saying that. Hawkins said, like religion is Apu, okay, was what. So philosophy has not provided an answer. Theology is too short to provide us the answers to the problem we are going to face for the whole of the humanity. Science, which looked at reality, good experiments, reality, and so on, has tripped into something, okay, which is neo-mysticism, and physical reality also does not provide us values. And technology, which is an application, okay, which used to be an application, improved our quality of life, but brought us to something which we call it as a singularity. Okay, this is the contribution. This is the negative contribution of technology. The troubles with all this was, the trouble with theology was all, that is attaching a word, what we call it, a property called as omniness to God. That is all powerful, all good, and all this and all, and putting I mean, from the point of view of what we call as logical consequences, it all doomed absolute. As far as philosophy is concerned, it set out to search something which is called as absolute, and absolute doesn't exist. I mean, there is the point, if your guiding factor is absolute, you will go nowhere. Science, we started with a good intent, okay, entered into something which is called as infinite or infinitesimal. That means infinitely small or infinitely large. Okay, and when it did that, okay, it created not only something which we call it as neo speculations or neo mysticism. Okay, it has gone far off. New science in that particular sense is not going to provide us with anything at this moment of time. And then systems or the reductionist people, okay, they, and I mean what we call as they also landed up into troubles of describing everything in terms of what we call it as intrinsic property based affair. Okay, they landed themselves into something which is known as twists in the arguments. Okay, so none of this is of any kind of a help as far as our current problem is concerned, our current big Q is concerned. What should we do? Now, a little bit of terminology which will gloss over for the time being. Logy, I mean, there are several things, several suffixes which are used for branches of knowledge. For example, biology. Okay, logy is used at many different places. The genesis of logy is experiential knowledge. The genesis of Sophy, philosophy, okay, Sophy is intellectual knowledge. Look at that. The suffix ens, enc, means integration of knowledge. Science, for example, is an integration of knowledge. X is empirical knowledge. Empirical meaning thereby we can do experiments. And then relaxed experiments are called as empirical experiments, where they may not be all, they may, I mean, experiment is a strong affair where the result should be independent of space, time and person. Okay. However, empirics is a experiment again, but a relaxed one. In the same way as we relaxed our dreams of getting right answer at right accuracy always, we relax that dream. The moment we relax that dream, okay, we made a progress. Otherwise, everything, both science as well as technology, was at a dead road. They would not have made any kind of a progress. So X is a empirical knowledge and ism is a viewpoint of knowledge. Okay, we are talking about wisdemism or wisdemics. We will be talking about, we'll attach these two words to that. Wisdemics consists of two words, wisdom, which is morality and prudence together, and empirical. That means we have some basis of objectivity into it, essentially. The sum total of this, I think now I am almost at the end of what I wanted to cover in the first session. Now is a situation, and now plus 20 years is another situation. Okay. Now consists of objects, worlds, processes, technology, products, services, memes, and human quality of life. Okay, that is our guide. That is the only guide that we have under this dimming environment. The only candle we have got to move through is what we call it as a value or quality of life. Value as far as quality of life is concerned. Now plus 20 years again, there will be objects, modified worlds, modified processes, modified technology, products and services and memes, which are new, absolutely new. Okay, and there also will be human quality of life. If the human quality of life now and the human quality of life 20 years, if HQL after 20 years is greater than HQL now, okay, we are moving probably in the right direction. If not, okay, we have to change the course. Okay, so for doing that, what we do is we project the future. Okay, and unfortunately, when disruptive technologies abound in the world now, it is very difficult to predict future beyond certain time. Okay, because the rate at which the technologies grow are so fast that they will not allow you to make predictions. For example, it's virtually impossible to make a long-term weather prediction, but short-term weather prediction, yes, we can do it. Yes, we can very well do it. Similarly, what we have to do is we have to look at the current state of affairs, make predictions maybe for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years at most. Okay. After the predictions are made, look at the kind of the world that will exist. Okay. And then see it onto the, what we call it as a yardstick of values. Okay. If it does not fit what we want, okay, then you have to do something which is called as a wisdemic regulation on research and technology. What we need to do to get out of the clutch of the singularity, and the clutch of the singularity being Roseff's overtaking or carbon agent, silicon agents overtaking carbon agents, okay, what we have to do is to do a regulation on research and technology. And regulation is not new. Even now there are regulations on the food, there are regulations on social behavior, there are regulations on drugs, there are regulations on entertainment. How effective is a different story, but we need regulations. It is dangerous. I mean, truth and value are different. It may be also true that we don't have free will. But putting that as a meme, do you know what disruptions it will make in the society? I can get up, kill another person, and then say that it was not I was wired to kill. Why are you punishing me? You cannot punish me on these grounds because I was wired to act in this particular fashion because I don't have free will. Do we want a society of the particular kind, or we would like to suppress a stupid meme, okay, which will disrupt the whole society together? Okay, these are the kinds of the regulations which we are talking about. Do we conduct research into such a fashion, okay, that it is going to make entities which are going to overtake us? Surely, as a human being, I would not like to do that. Of course, it is anthropocentric. And what is wrong in being anthropocentric? Okay, I would rather be anthropocentric, okay, but this is only one viewpoint. I would rather be anthropocentric, okay, than giving up the whole, I mean, throwing the whole towel into a situation where I don't act. I don't want that to happen. I have to find out a way. I have to find out a way to have something which we call it as a, from an anthropocentric viewpoint. I would like that the humanity betters off. I am not saying that turn off the technology like the anti-technologists are talking about. I am trying to say that you regulate the technology. If you can create the technology, okay, you still have the time to regulate it. Regulate it to the mankind's benefit. I think with that I have presented the problem and the type of the problem that we have to solve, and I have also shown sufficiently that the old wisdom is not going to help us in any way. We need to find out new pathways. Okay. With that, I will open this for questions and answer. Maybe I have already taken 2 hours and 15 minutes. Okay. I hope to allot more time to questions and answers by the end of the second session. But today, if you have any, okay, I would definitely like to answer them. Hmm? We have a limit. We just a few minutes. We have a limit. We have a limit of time for the hall. Okay, so whatever fits in that time zone.